in general, why does social media and games and the companies behind those social media and games attract so much of parents and kids and adults and people's attention so completely?
I think one of the reasons that this is such a hot topic and challenge right now is that we're basically talking about addiction, but a more complicated addiction than what we're used to. As if you had to, let's use alcoholism, for example, if you had to go inside of the bar or even a bottle to talk to your friends and do your work, if you carried that bottle around 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and if that bottle was being updated every day to be more personally delicious for you, I think a lot more of us would be having drinking problems. And so it's really just this addiction that is very deeply layered with very real aspects of our lives. And more, and sadly, younger and younger, we are seeing kids get drawn into social media and it just being the norm of how kids are communicating. So then to have this incredibly addictive, often damaging thing that is so wound into the fabric of how teens are communicating is really difficult. So I think it's no surprise that parents all over are just struggling with often noticing they've lost their kids in some ways to these devices or to these, I'd say more social media than games, but sometimes games too, for sure. And it also seeming like just everybody's doing it. So that's just a complicated combination that I think has created a lot of challenges.
So you said there that it's a little bit more of a complicated type of addiction, and one of the things you said there was gave the example of if the bottle or what we're drinking was being personalized for us all the time. How does that apply to technology? How is it being personalized, and how is that affecting the addiction?
Sure. So with most screens and certainly with social media, just about everything we do on a device is more or less tracked. So everything, especially on social media that we've clicked on, how long we've spent looking, even if we didn't click on anything in it, in a news feed, like how long we've looked at it, whose profiles we visited, how long we spent on those profiles, how long we spent, watching different videos or spending time on websites, all of that is tracked and fed into an algorithm. And if you don't know what that is, basically just like a big system of data, a big computer calculating, crunching all those numbers and doing its best to figure out based on your behavior and the behavior of other people like you. So imagine like running a test of 1 million lab rats who behave similarly to you do online. Oh, we showed 1 million lab rats these videos, and these 7 are the ones that seem to get the most clicks and shares. So those are the ones that'll appear on your feed. So everything that we're doing on these screens is being tracked and creating this self-fulfilling system to give us more or a different type of similar type of content that is ultimately about keeping us liking and scrolling and clicking. Because if we don't pay for these products, we are the product. We are the thing being sold. It is our time, our attention, or our data that is the way that these companies are making money off of us. And while on one hand, that makes them free to use, it also can create these really complicated challenges, often mental health issues, addiction, and things like that.
So you said just right there, and that's especially something I'm curious about, is you said mental health issues. So how does that play out in mental health issues? And we're talking about kids, but this is we're as adults we're using a lot of the same technology. So, but in particular with kids, what types of mental health issues is it creating, and why is it creating those?
Yeah, so I love that you called out that it's not just kids. A lot of times parents are like, these kids, the kids are all hooked on this stuff. And it's like, yeah, just the kids are hooked on this stuff. Okay. When really it's all of us. I think one thing that is unique, the parts that are unique to kids are a couple of things. One is that they haven't had the time of social development or life outside of this. This just has been often the norm of what socialization is like, which is so different from how often these kids' parents grew up and how we on this call grew up. It's just very, very different. That's one element. And then I think just because of adolescence and just the time in a lot of these kids' lives that they're being exposed to it, there's a lot of very natural, like not fully developed brains. There's going through these phases of identity and of development. And so one thing we're seeing, especially with young girls, is the amount of body image comparison. So of course, there have always been, beauty standards in society that media has created. But what is different now is just like the constant comparison. And you have these filters that we immediately put on our face, and we see like the live comparison of this 13-year-old girl and then how she looks as, the supermodel version of herself. and creating these like immediate, oh, why don't my eyes look like that? Lips look like that, things like that. And like basically telling ourselves over and over again, the way I look is not good enough. I have to ridiculousify it for the internet to be like good enough to get the likes, the hits, and attention. And for a variety of reasons, the things that get the likes and views and attention are often the more sexualized or the more, ridiculously beautified versions of these images. And so that, I think, just has like a consistent challenge on body image. That's one piece of it. Another piece that's really worth noticing and talking about is Snapchat is the #1 messaging app for teenagers. Snapchat, like they use Snap the way that we use text. What's your Snap has often become what's your number. So like it can sometimes feel very hard for a teenager to not be involved in that, as it feels like, especially with young flirting, they don't feel like they have something that they can connect with. And Snapchat has a default feature called Snap Map, which lets people physically know where their friends are all the time. So like you can physically see when your friends are hanging out without you. It's just all these extra little elements of confusing social dynamic. And so I think that's like just the constant seeing and knowing what everybody's doing, all the dynamics of high school and middle school, like following kids home from school. It's just like a lot of added elements. And, I had a really interesting conversation with a group of kids. So I give these talks at schools. My company now is Social Awakening. And that's where like I've been dedicating my time, and I'm speaking with a lot of schools and a lot of students. And I had one conversation with this group of students where, we're really getting into it. And I was talking like, these synthetic relationships, I think, are not a really good replacement for the real human connection. And one student said, would you rather have the synthetic relationships or nothing? And I said, look, like I really hear that. And if you were to pose it that way for me, I'd rather have the synthetic relationships, but I don't believe that that's the choice. Like I believe that's a false choice. And I believe that we've just reached a point, especially with young people, where in the olden days, if we were really bored or really not happy with something, we had to kind of figure out what the heck we were going to do about it, whether it's going out and figuring out some new game to play with our siblings or like going outside and making mistakes. I don't know, whatever it would be. But like we used to have to do that. And now we have just enough to kind of keep us docile. We have this thing that sort of feels like connection, but isn't quite it, and often leaves us feeling like this tired sense of like, well, I guess good enough, but not any kind of deep sense of meaning and fulfillment. And so my best guess as to like some of the big mental health shifts, like for so many people that we're seeing statistically, these huge mental health shifts around social media, I think that's a really big piece of it, that like there's just this huge culture of, okay, well, I am talking to my friend, I'm texting with them, or like I'm seeing what they're doing on social media, so I'm not totally lonely. But there still just is this underlying feeling of loneliness and non-fulfillment. And so I think that's prevalent. That's a hypothesis. That whole thing I've built is not research backed, but what is research backed is just a giant mental health spike in teens with highly depressive symptoms, self-harm, suicide. Recently, studies coming out that the later kids are getting their first smartphone, the better their mental health is across a number of different dimensions. And so that research is clear. The exactly why is kind of up for debate. And what I've shared is the sort of best guess that I'm giving at this moment.